This is a good thing to do. Okay. So we're going to try and convince you that going to Algonquin in the middle of winter is a good idea. And I know some of you have considered it, and many of you have said, no, we're not going to touch that. But we're going to show you why you might want to think about that. So Howard and I are going to do this together, and I'm going to do a lot of talking. And Howard is going to show, and all the pictures you see are going to be Howard's pictures. So between us, we're going to somehow manage to talk our way through this, and as I say, get to the conclusion. So this is a picture of Algonquin Park in the winter. Nice bright sky. Something we have look forward to shortly. Okay, how do I advance the?
Should be your right arrow key or the down arrow key if you have those.
I'm trying the down arrow.
Sometimes the space bar works.
Oh, geez. Well, this will work. This is not. No, I need to know how to. Oh, here we go. Oh, it's working. Okay, so Algonquin Park. We all know something about Algonquin Park. We've lived with Algonquin Park being there all of our life. And so what we want to try and convince you is that there's some things about Algonquin Park that you might not know about or might find interesting, and you might want to go there in the winter. So we all know that Algonquin was the first provincial park in Ontario, created in 1893, which is very early. Canada had just been created fairly recently, and I think Banff Park had been created before that time, but it was a very early provincial park. Oh, here we go. Okay. And it's big. Over 75,000 square kilometers. It's the third largest in Ontario after Polar Bear Provincial Park and Wabanaki, which is in the north somewhere. And it's really big. It's so big that it's bigger than 152 nations around the world. And there are only a couple of hundred nations in the world, so that's pretty big. But it's only slightly smaller than Jamaica or Lebanon or Puerto Rico. So it's big. And we think of it as being primarily boreal habitat. So we think about there it's being forested, there are lots of lakes and rivers, and it's a highland. It's higher than the land around it. There's quite a bit of biodiversity in this place. There are over 1,000 vascular plants species and 200 vertebrates that can be found in this vast area. So what do people think of when they think of Algonquin? They think of moose and loons and bears and beavers and wolves and other birds. And some of the primary activities there, and you can judge this by looking for maps of Algonquin Park, and you all find maps of where the lumbering is, and where you can camp, where you canoe, and where you can hike. And there's not a lot about where one can bird, but this is what we all think about Algonquin. And there is a certain cultural heritage. So here's the culture minute. And this is, I was surprised to find this. This is a statement from the Friends of Algonquin. They say for most of Algonquin's history, human settlement was not a very important element. Scattered family groups of Aboriginal peoples came to fish, hunt, and pick berries, but their numbers were never large. was not until the 1800s that big changes came to the rugged Algonquin highlands. So if that question is, that's the answer to that question. And a provincial passes through it, Highway 60, which extends for 56 kilometers through the park. And this is what most people see of Algonquin Park, especially in the summer months. They drive through Algonquin Park, they drive from one side through the other, and go from Huntsville to Whitney or wherever on the other side. And being a vast park, of course, you don't see very much of the park from that highway. What happened? Okay, so generally we think of this park being attractive in summer and in fall, and so here are some of Howard's pictures of Algonquin in the summer. Howard has been there to Algonquin many times in other seasons, and let's see.
This is Amicus Lake, which has actually been formed as a beaver pond. This is a beaver pond that covers an area that's about half the width of Stratford. It's a huge pond that formed many, many years ago from the action of the beavers. So it's quite a neat place, and there's a nice trail that gets to it.
Okay, let's see. How did I do this? And now the down arrow works.
And this is Little Joe Lake, one of the thousands and thousands of lakes in Algonquin on a summer morning when the mist is just coming up off the lake. So a very characteristic view of Algonquin in the summer.
What are those buoys out there? Are they?
Oh, this is at Erewhon Pines, which is a wonderful lodge where you can actually stay in Algonquin Park. And this is just offshore from that lodge. So in the far distance, you can see a pontoon. You can swim out to the pontoon if you want, and the buoys are recommending the safe swimming area.
I thought maybe there were markers for lobster pots.
No.
So this is what people do when they go to Algonquin in the summer. Now we're going to think a bit about going out to Algonquin in other seasons, and you can tell by this picture that it's winter now. And there's a little bit of movie here. Howard made us a movie.
Well, it's not a movie, but the thing I want you to notice about this picture in particular is you would not be able to shoot this picture in the summer because you can see where the twigs are around the bird. The twigs would be covered in leaves, and you would never even spot this chickadee, let alone be able to get a good image of it. So one of the great advantages of Algonquin in the winter for birding is that there are no leaves in the way.
Yes. So that's the movie.
That's the movie. Well, he's chipping away at a seed.
Two-frame movie.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Algonquin that you might not know about, and that might influence whether you want to go there in the winter. And this is, of course, a Canada jay, a typical bird's not difficult to find in certain places in Algonquin. And one of the things about the Canada jay that I had forgotten was that they're fairly substantial. They're as big as a blue jay. So it's hard to tell that from the picture.
And if you go back for a second, the other thing I want to mention about this is notice it's standing on a suet feeder. This is at the Spruce Bog Boardwalk, and those feeders are filled all winter long by the park naturalists and are a clear draw for all the birds. So you can actually go to specific places where you're probably seeing these birds is very high because that's where the feeders are located.
Okay, now, so this is the vision of for the park, according to the Friends of Algonquin, and protection of birds and animals, field for experiments in forestry. After all, I think probably it's actually commonly believed that this park was established for the benefit of maintaining forests for the forestry industry, but there have been some other reasons as well. And in their list includes the benefits beneficial effects on the climate. So they're kind of up to date on these things. So here's a little bit about the geology of the Algonquin highlands. They're highlands, right? They're higher than the area around. And the basic point I want to make about this is that it's old and has undergone many changes over the tens of thousands of years. So it's
well, sorry, only your cup. Well, you're going to go. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I'll go back.
No, because remember the view we all think of Algonquin Park is only 10,000 years old. It's only the latest iteration of what that part of the world looks like.
So it was formed a long time ago as part of the Canadian Shield, and that's really old. The land itself is old, not necessarily the life on the land, however. There have been volcanoes, and there's a fault canyon called Barron Canyon somewhere in Algonquin Park, and it's been subject to extraterrestrial forces. And there have been meteorites landing in Algonquin. I mean, this is what happened in a place that's been around for a long time, and it's been affected by glaciers. That's probably the most important influence, at least in the recent thousands of years. And the last glaciers covered Ontario and northern United States until about 10 to 15,000 years ago, ice being several miles thick. So think about what life was like in Algonquin or southern Ontario at that time. It was non-existent unless you could somehow manage to live on top of or under several miles of ice. So that's the limitation on all life in our area. Much of the land at one point was covered by water, salt water at one time. So that's an influence on it. The park includes typical glacial features: eskers, kettles, K-moraines, drumlins, and so on. And that gives rise to the many lakes and rivers you see in Algonquin. And of course, it's been subject to erosion. You think of Algonquin, you think of lots of bare rocks. Well, they haven't been bare forever. A lot of them have been covered at one point, but have eroded away. And just to complete the picture, that part of Ontario is, and as well as us, has moved around the Earth's surface from various times, and at one point was tropical. So if we see some influences of that, we shouldn't be surprised. So quite a variety of influences on the geology of this area over a long period of time. As for the land features, the lakes and rivers are probably the most prominent feature, and this picture was of the river system here was taken on a foggy day. That's why it's out of focus. The park includes rivers that flow into the Ottawa River, the Petawawa, the Ponchera, the Madawaska, and the Mable du Pont, and one river system that flows towards Georgian Bay, the Oxtongue River system. And whoops, back up. What happened? And so there's a picture of one of these rivers, the Madawaska, as it turns out, by someone that had made some contribution to our appreciation of Algonquin, that is Tom Townsend. So in a gross way, the Algonquin Park is on a boundary. It's a territory to the south and the west is the mixed deciduous forest of the Great Lakes Basin. And to the north, we encountered the north and easterly part, we encounter coniferous forests. This is the boreal forest that we know and love. So if you're going for fall foliage, here's a little piece of advice. If you're going for fall foliage, stick to the southwest, I would think, where the deciduous trees are to be found. And if you want to lumber, then go to the north and the easterly side where there are lots of coniferous trees that you can chop down. So this is
the hardwood lookout in late summer, and this is part of that deciduous forest that Ken was talking about, which is in the south and the west, and it's readily accessible from Highway 60. But this is that typical late summer look, and then the fall look that we all know. This is actually the road that goes up to Erewhon Pines, so it has a nice blaze of color on either side. This is probably a week before the final peak of the fall colors would have happened. Usually around that peak's usually around the 27th of September, but when I was up there this particular time, the peak was a bit late.
okay. So why would you go in winter to Algonquin Park? I'm now going to answer that question for you. First and foremost, the habitat provides homes for species of birds not found in other places at other times. So it includes various jays, grosbeaks, crossbills, finches, siskins, some woodpeckers, and some grouse. That's you ask a birder why they would go there in winter. That's primarily why they would say they would do that. So which habitat houses most birds? Mostly it's the coniferous forest, not exclusively, but the coniferous forest provides lots of food for birds that are seed eaters, and of course they eat the cones that grow on these trees. These cones are concentrated in particular areas in particular seasons, and one of the best artificial means of feeding birds in winter is the feeders. And so lots of the pictures that you see here, lots of what we saw, there were birds at feeders. And furthermore, as you will see shortly, hand feeding is a great way to get a bird to come to you and to spend a few moments with you, and then to flit off with whatever it's gleaned from your hand. And so one piece of advice is, if you go during the winter, then you should always take a bag of feed with you, because you will need it. We were not prepared for that and had to bum feed from other people, but people were carrying large bags of feed, and the birds were clearly benefiting from that.
Now we have to provide the relevant disclaimer here. The park rules prohibit feeding the birds. So we have told you that you cannot feed the birds, and now Ken can carry on with telling you how to feed the birds.
Well, that's a rule that is uttered more often in the failure to
breach in the breach than the delivery.
That's right. I mean, people feed them like crazy, especially right around the visitor center where there are lots of park people too. So this park is also high. It's higher than the surrounding area, so that's going to be a different habitat than lowland places like us, like Southern Ontario. And there are migration patterns that are unique to that area, particularly the birds that migrate erratically. That's to say, they move from one place to another depending on the food supply. And so we know the crossbills and the grosbeaks are famous for doing that. And so, of course, some years there'll be lots of birds because there's lots of food for them, and other years there's a lot less. Some of the trees engage in the strategy of massing, which is to say, to generate large amounts of seeds in a particular year, and then many fewer seeds the next few years, and then massed again. So this is a strategy to overcome the feeding birds. If they produced a constant supply, then the birds would know that, they would come all the time, and they would eat lots of the seeds. But if the trees overwhelm the birds with gazillions of seeds all at once, there's a greater chance that some of them will make their way to the ground and actually are planted and may grow. There are some birds that breed in the winter, so they're likely to be seen there. Various raptors and owls. And it's accessible to us in the south, so it's not that far away. If Algonquin Park were 500 kilometers north of Toronto, there would be many fewer visitors, but it's convenient because it's not that far away. By the way, you can approach Algonquin from the north, and when I lived in North Bay, I would spend some time going to Algonquin, going south to Algonquin, and not too many people would do that, largely because there are not many people up there in the near north. But and so one of the consequences of that is that while I lived in North Bay, I experienced a lot of these birds, a lot of this habitat where I lived on Trout Lake. So I didn't need to travel to Algonquin because I was in that habitat. But for many people, it's a trek up from the south, but not much of a trek. And it's undeveloped, which is to say, there are no cities or houses or factories or agricultural fields in that area. So that makes it a different kind of habitat for critters trying to make a living. So we're going to look at some of the birds now. And this is Howard's grouped them in terms of where we travel. There's several routes that we followed looking for birds. Where was this, Howard? What's this?
So this is the Spruce Bog Boardwalk, which is very near the visitor center. So it's very easy to find, very easy to walk in from the parking. You don't necessarily have to go along the whole boardwalk, but just walking in along the trail gets you to the area where some of their feeders are, and therefore where you see a lot of the birds.
This is where you dig out your bird seed. And so here are some of those birds. And this is one of the best pictures, I think, of the lot. And this is, I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to identify these things, and then I will provide you with the answer. This is pine grosbeak. This is, no, I won't delay the
prizes here. So
this is a well-known bird here, but also common in Algonquin. And this is a female pine grosbeak. So if you think of pine grosbeaks as being primarily pink, then that's only true of the males and not true of the females. So now where are we going?
This is the road going into the visitor center at Algonquin Park. The visitor center towards the east side of the park near to Whitney. And this is simply showing what the road looks like in the winter. You get these wonderful effects when you have a bright sky of the brilliant snow and the nice snow on the trees and the nice clean snow on much of the roads.
And so you go in there and you visit the visitor center, and this is one of the most common birds that we saw at the visitor center. It's the famed evening grosbeak, male, of course. And here is this is one for Chris, and Chris is not on though, is he? This is a downy woodpecker. This is another pine grosbeak female, or possibly young, I suppose. I'm guessing probably.
That should be a female. That should be a female.
We saw them by the dozens. Here's another. They're landing on the trees around the feeders. There's a balcony on the visitor center that looks out over the terrain and the lake, and the feeders are below it, and these birds, having been fed there kilograms of food every day, they are hanging from the trees, waiting for their turn to jump into the feeder. So this is
the advantage of this setup, as you can see, and as Ken described, is that the platform is elevated probably 20 or 25 feet in the air, which means most of the birds, when they come and perch in the deciduous trees around that area, are perching at your eye level. So it brings the birds up it brings your height up to match them. You're not looking up into the trees, you're looking straight out into the trees.
Or down at
really
them
good
too.
to see them.
So this is what the balcony, where you go out beyond this and look down at the feeders, or you can look at the birds from one of the cameras. And I could not find any pictures of the cameras, but this is something you should do not only in wintertime, but now. Go to the Friends of the Algonquin website, and look at the images from the cameras that they have mounted there. And this time of year, they're pointed out towards the foliage, and you can see the changes, the colors, the leaves, and that sort of thing. If you do that during the day, you can actually see the people who are out on the balcony and coming and going. Can't do that now because it's dark, but you can get a good sense of what's going on there without actually going there. Maybe this might appeal to some of you. So they have cameras that are pointed towards the feeders during the winter months, starting in December, I think. And you can get a good view of a lot of these birds from looking at these images without having to go to Algonquin. And here are the addresses of some of the saved recordings. And I don't know, can I can't. I was hoping that, stop that. What am I doing? Where am I going?
You're jumping forward, so you want to go back.
Okay. I was hoping that maybe I could, while we're doing this, actually go to one of these sites, but I don't think I can. So, and I'm not going to make things complicated by trying to. But anyway, look for Algonquin Park cameras, bird feeders, and you find all sorts of really nice pictures of them. So here are some of the things that you see there. I mean, these are spectacular birds. Black-cap chickadees, not boreal chickadees, unfortunately. Look at the way that he's gripped the branch there. He's got the claws right around the branch. That's another pine grosbeak. So this is, if you look out from the balcony at the back of the visitor center, you look out towards, there's a lake back there, and this is a typical winter scene. This is an evening grosbeak female. But evening grosbeaks and pine grosbeaks were the common ones.
By the way, does anybody know where that name would come from? Evening grosbeak? What? Because we saw them in the morning. They were certainly out in the morning in numbers. Does anybody understand that?
No, I have to look.
No. Okay.
And the way that birds were named, it was probably seen by someone first in the evening, like Philadelphia vireo and the Baltimore oriole.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing, but I don't know. Now, let me make an observation about blue jays. Blue jays have a black collar that extends around in kind of an odd shape. It doesn't go around the face, it kind of angles back. And looking at these things, I can see what advantage there would be to having such a shape on this black collar. Because when they put their heads down, there's what you see is a black circle. So it looks like a face. So it might persuade other critters that they're being looked at, even though the bird is looking down and doing some feeding. There's a thesis for somebody. I'm not going to do it.
If I can comment about this as well, for anybody who is interested in bird pictures, the other advantage of Algonquin in the winter is that the sun remains low in the sky. So on a very bright, very sunny day, you may get direct sunlight that is coming in at a low angle, which gives this nice, bright and brilliant effect without having the harshness of noon sun at some other time. This one I think was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and it doesn't look like harsh noonday light. It's a nice side lighting for these birds. So the lighting conditions are good in the winter on a sunny day.
And what happened? I lost my ability to advance.
There you are.
Oh,
Francisco.
oh, it's slow, I guess. That's what it is. So this is how it's intended to be. What is this?
It said pine siskin on the photo.
Yeah, well, just forget you saw that. Okay, that's a pine siskin, and a less common bird there, but present nevertheless. Okay, now here's a little bit of travel advice here. We'll keep this short. Where to go in the winter? Well, based on what I've said so far, it would seem natural that the place to look for birds in particular is to go to the east side where the coniferous trees are. Unfortunately, most people approaching from Toronto come in on the west side, as we did, and end up having to travel all the way through the park to see the really good habitat. The other thing that we discovered is if you can find any open water anywhere, that's good, because that's an uncommon habitat in the winter there, and you find things there that you don't normally see. So here are some of the sites that we found particularly helpful. The visitor center and Spruce Bog Trail. We talked about that already. So it's bring birdseed. I'm not saying that, I guess, you didn't hear me say that. Opeongo Road. This is the road that leads up to where the some of the logging operations are. And that is particularly productive. This is on the west side, on the east side, close to the eastern gates. There's a logging museum. This is supposedly a good place for black-backed woodpeckers, but we didn't find any there.
The thing about the trails is, as you know, there are many interpretive trails through Algonquin Park. Only a small number of them are open for the public during the winter, but the logging museum is one because it's a relatively flat trail. You don't worry about the snow, but it's a great way to see a lot of things and get some really good views of the park in winter in an easy way without snowshoes.
And they do clear some of the trails. Some of the trails are prepared for skiers. But one of the best places to look is in the campgrounds, because there are some campers there, and where there are campers, there are bird feeders, and where there are bird feeders, there are birds. And the Mew Lake, for example, is one campground that we found particularly productive. You can try the old rail trail, which runs through the park, and maybe Busy Lake Trail might be one place to look. It depends on conditions whether that's going to be accessible to you in the winter. And you also try the old airport. which is not, we were close to that, weren't we, Howard? That's at the end of, it's near the Mule Lake campground, and if that's open, that's a good place to look. Okay,
So we're going back now to the Spruce Boardwalk, and here are some family members just coming along the trail at the Spruce Bog Boardwalk. Quite accessible, easily accessible.
I surmise, having looked at these things a million times, that basically this is a family with some young pine grosbeaks in the family. I don't know whether that's,
they might be females sporting the pink color, so there's a little confusion here.
But nevertheless, there are the appropriate colors for these birds. This is the
red-breasted nuthatch.
red-breasted
nuthatch. When you're there and you see where the suet feeder is, if you just stand there for 20 minutes, you'll see many birds come in and perch in the trees around. So you have to keep your eyes open for that. And then they may come down to the suet feeders from there. But the birds tend to hover in that area and you see them very readily.
And this is, whoops, I thought I was going to get
another Canada jay on the ground under the feeder. And the next one is not a bird.
No, but I mean, I was going to say something about these bands.
Oh, the banding, yes.
Thanks to the work of Doug Tozer, the Tozer the Younger, who's a biologist. He's banded the Canada jays in that area so that he can identify each individual bird. So these 4 bands identify this particular bird, and he made a study of them, watching to see what individual birds did over a certain period of time. And this is
a non-bird.
A non-bird, a red squirrel. Red squirrels are common in coniferous forests. Is that right?
Yes. Oh, very common. They love the cones that come down from the pines. They eat them voraciously.
Okay. So here's an illegal activity. Now there's a nuthatch engaging that same activity. This is a question for Jean. Whose hand is this?
That's yours, Ken. I recognize it.
That's my hand. The hand of God, right? Feeding the birds. Okay, now if you go up the Opeongo Road at the right time, you might catch these birds, which are white-winged crossbills. And we have males and females in this picture. They hang out on the tops of the trees. I think we looked for them a couple of times and we didn't see them one time, but the second time there was a crowd looking up into the trees, so it helped us find these guys.
Well, again, the easy way on the Opeongo Road to find these birds is to walk along the trail and look for people looking up. And when you find the people looking up, you found the birds.
That's bird watcher watching. That's a
correct,
tried and true practice. This is a Canada jay.
Now this is at the Logging Museum. So another place where they cluster, the birds here cluster in the area between the parking lot and the beginning of the trail because they expect to get handouts. So it's very easy to find Canada jays there. And blue jays as well.
And this it's ruffed grouse. So not the sought after spruce grouse, but a grouse nevertheless. And that got a fairly close look at this. This is at Mule Lake. And
the best place to see the spruce grouse is at the Spruce Bog Boardwalk, but we didn't see one at this time. I've seen them there in the summer, but I haven't seen them there in the winter.
So this has several names. well, I'll call it the American pine marten. Now, this is the first pine marten I had ever seen in my life. And I lived in near north of Ontario. I lived in Newfoundland. I lived in Nova Scotia for many years and had never seen one of these things, but we saw one here. So we drove into the campground, and in the parking, there was a parking lot, and in this parking lot were half a dozen tripods with cameras on them, but no people. So we went in and found the people eventually, and said that they had been staking out this pine marten that had been coming to a garbage bin that was associated with the campground. And we said, "Oh yeah, you mean like that one over there?" So they've been there for several hours looking for these things, and we just pulled in, and one presented itself. That was cool. One of the highlights, I think. So these are the birds that we saw. Quite a few. It's, I think, 21 species. Ravens are fairly common there. But here are some birds that were missing in action. These are birds we didn't see. Didn't see any black-backed woodpeckers. That was too bad. We didn't see any spruce grouse. Didn't see any boreal chickadees or any barred owls. I would have hoped to see all of these. Nor did we see any moose or black bears. So if that's what he went for, then you'd be out of luck. I think in winter especially, of course, bears would be nowhere to be found. Moose would be nowhere to be found either. So getting close to the end here, let's just give you a bit of guidance how to get there. You can take the 400, 401, and then Highway 11. So it's basically two sides of a triangle. You go into Toronto and then up again, or you can go cross country and take back roads going through Muskoka, Simcoe, Grey County, and Wellington. And at least according to the mapping software that I've looked at, it takes the same amount of time, no matter. So there's no choice between these two routes. You might prefer to go cross country, but you're not going to get there any faster than you do if you go on the main highways, except you avoid going through Toronto. Of course, it depends a lot on the weather. So here's some more advice. I was going to say sage advice. We'll see. We stayed in Huntsville, and I have said to you that the eastern side of the park is more interesting. So if I was going again, I would stay at Huntsville for the first night, because that's close to the highway, it's close to civilization. But after that, I'd prefer to stay on the west side if you can manage it.
Sorry, the east side. Stay on the east side.
East side.
After that.
Stay on the east side.
Yeah.
Not many places to stay. I don't know whether there's any place to stay in the park. You can stay in the camp.
In the park, if you want to stay in the winter in the park, you have to bring your own tent. So you can camp in a small number of the campgrounds are open through the whole winter, and with your own tent and camping equipment, you can stay.
Not many people were keen on doing that. Okay, now this is important. Where to eat in Huntsville? And this is the restaurant that we discovered. We went there several times. It had very good meals, and they were very accommodating. West Side Fish and Chips on the west side, I guess, of Huntsville. I'm thinking,
the west side of the lake.
West side of the lake, and more in the southern.
I can't remember it's in the south part, but I can't remember the name of the lake that Huntsville is on. But that's where it is, yeah.
Huntsville, Lake of Bays. Nobody
no,
it's
another lake near that. There's so many lakes. Sorry, I can't remember at the moment.
This is the other important thing to know about the bakeries in the Huntsville. Howard is an expert on the bakeries of that area, and you should check them out.
So the original location, just to go make that clear, the original location is in Dwight, which is the last town you go through coming into Algonquin from the west, and that's the original bakery, and that's where all the baking is done. They've opened a branch in Huntsville, which is just more accessible if you're actually in Huntsville, but wonderful, wonderful baked goods, wonderful bread. So it's definitely worth the stopping at Henrietta's. In the summer, you can wait half an hour to get into the bakery. But in the winter, it's much easier. You can just walk in and get what you like.
I've saved this for the very end. Discussion of winter weather. This is what it looked like when we were coming home from Huntsville. It was the worst winter storm I'd ever encountered in my life. It was we barely managed to stay on the road. There were trees down on the roads, the snow you couldn't see in front of the car. So you run the risk of this happening, but that's part of the adventure. So I just wanted to point out that there are some good guidebooks that would help you if you're going to Algonquin, starting with the Burrell's book on best places to bird in Ontario. Has good information about a variety of spots, and they're well informed. We have Michael Runce's book, The Explorer's Guide to Algonquin Park, which is over there on the table. I can't show it to you, I don't think. Maybe try. Let's see what happens. There. If I hold it right in front of my face, you can see it. It doesn't obliterate it. That's just a fine book on Algonquin Park in general. Not too much, unfortunately, about winter. And then we have Ron Tolger's book on the birds of Algonquin Park. A fine volume of great detail on everything you want to know about birds in Algonquin Park. And so we end with my hand and the bird, chickadee. Back out into the wilds, the weather.
That is what you were looking at. Not good.
And then it got dark. I'm not sure what comes after this. So going to Algonquin in the winter has decided appeal, and some of the disadvantages are not so unappealing as to keep you out. So I would urge you to contemplate going to Algonquin in the winter.
Okay, I'm just going to turn that off.
I